Great, well, that has started, so I think we will start our session now. Thank you everyone for coming to this session at the Stay at Home Festival. Thank you if you have been to many of the other events that have been on this last week. We've had such a brilliant time with everyone, just celebrating all things bookish and writing. So today we've got Rosie Wilby with her book, The Breakup Monologues, and I'm just going to introduce a little bit about Rosie and then we'll get started with the session. So Rosie Wilby is an award-winning comedian who has appeared many times on BBC Radio 4 programmes, including Women's Hour and Forethought. Her first book, Is Monogamy Dead, was longlisted for the Polari First Book Prize and followed a trilogy of internationally acclaimed solo shows investigating the psychology of love and relationships. She has occasionally been described as a lesbian Louis Theroux due to her chatty, immersive style of research, but I think is a fantastic description. Rosie also presents the Breakup Monologues podcast, which provides the inspiration for her brand new book and was nominated for a British Podcast Award in 2020. So thank you, Rosie, for being here.
Well, thank you very much. So I guess I should take it away then. And I mean, I'm hoping people will have some questions later on, but I'll just chat a little bit about my two books and read a couple of extracts from each of those two books. But yeah, it'd be great if you do have questions and we can have a little bit of a discussion about relationships and how they work, or sometimes don't. And yeah, so the new book that is coming out at the end of May, so you've got time to pre-order it, is called The Breakup Monologues. This is the advanced copy, actually, and the final copy is going to look like that with a very bright, colourful cover. And the reason that I have come to write this book, The Breakup Monologues, is, as Joanna said, that I have been presenting a podcast called The Breakup Monologues for a few years. And this all came about because I got dumped by email about 10 years ago now. And at the time, I thought, oh, hang on. Oh, yeah, okay. Got a funny message flash up on my screen. And so at the time, I thought that getting dumped by email was maybe a little bit impersonal. And of course, now we have lots of ways of breaking up with somebody: ghosting, breadcrumbing, orbiting. What do all those things mean? You can actually find out in a chapter all about the lexicon of breakups. But ghosting is essentially just disappearing without contacting the person to let them know why you're no longer interested. But yeah, I did think that getting dumped by email was a bit brutal and harsh, although I did feel much better once I had corrected her spelling and punctuation, and indeed changed the font. Breakup in wingdings looks far better. And so I ended up touring a show all about my own breakup story, and then other performers and comedians would come up to me afterwards and talk about their breakup stories and their experiences, and sometimes they're bizarre, funny, strange, poignant, very human tales of recovering from a relationship ending. And I decided that I ought to really set up a live chat show that we began recording, because I think it's important when you are heartbroken to feel that you are not alone in that experience. And so if you do read this book, you could learn all kinds of things about the science of heartbreak, about how heartbreak parallels with withdrawing from a drug, and also how we might even be able to take a love drug or anti-love drug in the future that would help us reduce the trauma of a breakup, and whether or not we think that's a good idea. But most of all, you will learn all about my relationship with girlfriend, my partner, who's listening in the other room, actually. And she and I have a really good relationship, the best relationship I've ever had, because I've learned how to communicate and actually be who I want to be in a relationship. And that's been quite a long journey for me. And I have incorporated a lot of learning along the way of relationships not always working out. Sometimes they were great for a while and then they didn't work out. So this is really a story of my journey and of learning from my past breakups and my past heartbreaks about how to finally make a relationship work. And so let's find out a little bit about girlfriend, my relationship with her, in this section from the prologue, which begins with a little bit of dialogue between us. "You look beautiful today." "Thanks, baby. You're a bit into me today, aren't you?" "I'm always into you." "No, you're not." "True. We're driving to a festival in girlfriend's midlife crisis car, an electric blue BMW convertible. Although the way she drives it makes me wonder if you can still describe it as a midlife crisis if it ends up killing us. That would be an end-of-life crisis, and quite a crisis at that. Never mind. The sun is shining. Our life is good. We have a fancy loft conversion. We go on ski holidays. We Google things like, can dogs eat mange too? After 2 decades of scratching out a creative existence from gig to gig, first as a wistful indie songwriter and then as a willfully grassrootsy comedian, I now get to live like a wanker because my libido went all aspirational on me and drew me to a partner with an actual job. However, 3 months shy of our 3-year anniversary, shit has got real. Girlfriend and I have reached a refreshing level of frankness about the fact that our mutual desire has waned. We have teetered and toppled over the parapet of honeymoon bliss and fallen to the ground below, stirred from the anaesthetizing effects of the sexy brain chemicals that have propelled us along thus far with relative ease. Suddenly, we're acutely aware of the careers and friends that we have neglected during the happy haze. We have reached the stage where being in a relationship with a fellow human has become a massive pain in the arse, even though it is a largely excellent relationship that neither of us intends to leave. Repeat, we are not going to break up, not for the foreseeable, not us. In fact, it is the first time I've reached this point and not been planning a daring, dramatic escape, counting up the significant partners whom I probably would have married if I had been legally available to me all along. I am now on to my 5th wife. That puts me on a multi-marriage par with Joan Collins already. At the age of 48, she was 68 when she married her final husband. If I was going to continue to be a slave to serial monogamy, and if you're reading this, darling girlfriend, or listening in the next room, then of course I'm not. I would have ample time to overtake her and catch up with Liz Taylor and her 7 husbands, one of whom she married twice, or even Jar Jar Gabor and her tally of 9. But I'm done with twisting. I think I'd like to stick. I found a funny, sexy, generous partner, even if she does have a ridiculous, knobby car. Surely if I left this one, I'd be breaking up with love altogether. It would be my endgame. And it is from this position of at least wanting to stay, of accepting the maddening claustrophobia of companionship, that I want to investigate why breakups continue to compel me so much. Perhaps it is because breakups facilitate or maybe even necessitate transformation. In the wake of a separation, our peers allow us to reinvent ourselves. The rest of the time, they like us to stay fixed so that they can move around and ahead of us. But heartbreak is the golden ticket that circumvents this bullshit. Renewed and reborn, standing at the edge of the echoing canyon of our former frustrations, we shout, "This is who I am now," and we run and skip away from the parched carcasses of the old selves we have grown to hate. For me, it has been during these fleeting, liberating gaps of singledom that I have really got shit done. I recorded and released an album. I launched a boutique music PR company. I started comedy. I wrote a book. Each time I harnessed any lingering feelings of anger, sadness, and confusion and used them as energizing forces for creativity, for moving forwards with new insights into my own shortcomings and foibles. I wonder if it is possible to do that much learning and actively stay in a relationship. I hope so. It must be, right? Or else all long-term couples would be codependent, emotionally stunted weirdos. Oh, hang on. So I'm going to fast forward to a later section in the book. And the book is in 2 halves, loosely. Well, there's a bonus section actually in the middle with some bite-sized breakup stories, a breakup playlist of lots of breakup songs recommended by all my comedian and author friends who've guested on the Breakup Monologues podcast, and also a list of some of my favourite breakup films. And obviously, if you wanted to tell me about any of your favorite breakup songs or breakup films, you could post that in the comments and we could add that to the discussion later on, or you could contact me on social media. I'd love to know about people's favorite breakup songs and breakup films. But the two main sections of the book are a section that looks backwards at my relationship from the present to the start of the relationship, and then forwards, because I'm very interested in this idea that we can sort of travel through time and look at our relationships from different perspectives, and we might have a different viewpoint if we take what we know from the past into the future. So I've likened it a bit to the idea, well, you can see here, of a butterfly painting like we do as a child, and the way we sort of look at the paint smooshing together on the paper actually alters depending on the distribution of the paint, depending on the bits of the picture that we focus on, depending on the brightness of the colors on each half. But it is actually maybe the same picture, but it kind of looks different to us. So that's the idea that I am playing with, because I've always liked time travel in my comedy shows, and the idea of how time can sometimes feel non-linear. I mean, beginnings and endings are sort of the same, because the beginning of a relationship is the end of you being single, and vice versa. So I think a beginning is always an ending of something, and an ending is always a beginning of something. And sometimes we don't realize that when we're wrapped up in the ending of things, that it may be the beginning of something good. So in the second half of the book, I'm looking forwards through the relationship with more optimism, incorporating all the things that I've learned. And there's a chapter where we're on holiday together, and we have a conversation on a Spanish balcony at a friend's apartment that we're staying in, and we're sharing a pizza. And as I drift off to sleep that night, gazing at the hypnotic rotations of the ceiling fan, I think about how breakups, while they may hurt at the time, really do shape us in good ways and equip us to make much better choices. And so then we're going to talk about what happens on the next day, because I'm very much looking in this chapter about how having shared values and experiences and in-jokes together actually helps create connection. The next morning, one of our neighbours, a tanned local man, walks across the shared courtyard towards the little oval pool as we are opening up the balcony doors. "Buenos dias," he shouts up, smiling from under the brim of his straw hat. Girlfriend leans on the balcony rail confidently and shouts back, "Buenos Aires." I do a double take. Did she just say what I thought she said? She seemed so sure of herself. Surely not. I won't say anything. The man, nodding, still beaming, walks on. After an alfresco breakfast of nectarines and fresh, fluffy bread, we walk down the steep, quiet road towards the beach. "Coming back up this isn't going to be fun. I hope we haven't forgotten anything," shouts girlfriend after me as I break into a jog ahead of her, desperate to get into the sea. "I think I'll look into hiring a car." "Whatever you reckon, baby." Once we walk briskly across the hot sand and settle onto some recliners under umbrellas, we take off our t-shirts, ready to go for a swim. A man on the plane did warn us about the sea at Mojaca. "It's very rough in the mornings," he said sternly. "But it looks fine." A few waves crash up the beach and tickle our toes. Girlfriend steps forward until the water is up to her middle. I follow. Then the floor suddenly disappears from under me, and I am somersaulting around inside a washing machine, pebbles and grit forcing their way up into my nose and into every orifice. This is it. I'm dying. Which way up am I? Then I am spat out again onto the beach, further up than when I started. My carefully tied, elegant little ponytail was moved around almost to the front of my head. Mud seems to be pouring down my face. I pat my body down to check I'm still wearing both parts of my bikini. Girlfriend is laughing hysterically. "Oh my God, look at you. What just happened?" A wave caught us. There's a sort of shelf where the water breaks, and if you don't get past it quickly, well, you nearly drown? Something like that. "Come on, let's get showered over there. We'll feel better." I think I'm still in shock. At the dribbly beach shower, I attempt to hose out grit from my bikini bottoms in the least revealing way possible. finally clean and a bit more refreshed, we buy a cold beer from the beachside bar. Feeling the fuzzy effects of the alcohol immediately, I venture, "You know, this morning when that man from one of the apartments said Buenos dias." "Yes. Did you say Buenos Aires back to him?" "Oh, bloody hell, did I? What a knob." A recent study of over 11,000 couples found that in-jokes and shared experiences, like perhaps making hapless attempts at foreign languages or getting humiliatingly washing machined in an unexpectedly vicious sea, are a vital part of the dynamic that you build with someone. And that, in turn, is so much more important than the characteristics of the two separate individuals in terms of predicting relationship quality and satisfaction. So next time someone says to you, "It's not you, it's me," you can call them out on it, because science suggests it is neither of you, it's the dynamic between you. Giggling our way through the week, we rest and repair our weary, dented souls. Sitting on our towels on the warm sand one late afternoon, she says, "Baby, can we start looking for a puppy when we get home?" "Oh my God, yes, how cute. I can't wait to be a dog mummy with you." Which actually does actually neatly segue into the fact there is a whole section in the book, which I'm not going to read a lot from today, but our dog and our cat play quite a role in this book, because there is a lot about pet custody during breakups and about how pets can basically keep our relationships together because they provide constant love and entertainment. And so the next chapter in this book is actually "Till Dog Us Do Part," which I was quite proud of that chapter, I think, probably disproportionately. So I'm going to now read a couple of bits from the first book, which was called "Is Monogamy Dead?" Yes, and this was based on a survey. This is the book, "Is Monogamy Dead?" There's that one. And this was based on a survey that I did as research for my comedy show, which was the middle part of the trilogy of shows that Joanna mentioned right at the beginning. It began with a show called The Science of Sex, then Is Monogamy Dead?, then my breakup show, which was called The Conscious Uncoupling, which led to the Breakup Monologues. And Is Monogamy Dead was based on a survey asking what counts as cheating. And I realized it's not actually such a black and white question as many people might assume it is. It's very nuanced and complex. And for some people, it might not be about sex per se. It might be about emotional connection and what their partner feels about other people, rather than whether they have a drunken snog at a party and that kind of thing. So this was quite a knotty question to get into. And again, this book does travel around in time and sort of has a kind of current timeline. And actually, right at the end of this book, I meet girlfriend, although she's called S, which is her initial, at the end of this book. And so that leads up to where we sort of come to eventually in the second book. And it also has flashback sections to my previous relationships and sort of looking back at how perhaps they didn't work out or were sometimes really lovely and good relationships, but there were problems and things that were not communicated about properly. But there's a section that I really love reading, which is about when I was with my ex in Australia. And what's important to say about this section is the key conflict in this relationship was that she was not out as gay to her family, which I found very challenging and difficult because the relationship felt invisible. I mean, she did try to reassure me by saying that her parents had enjoyed the film Brokeback Mountain, which I didn't think was giving such a good sense of how gay relationships can play out. So but I really enjoy it. This is sort of I wanted to write a sort of lyrical description of how I felt being in love kind of felt. And I think sometimes we can sometimes feel very intensely when we're in a relationship that we know is starting to go wrong, and our feelings can somehow be almost intensified by that temporarily. And so that's sort of what I wanted to convey. Sarah was at the bar. I smiled at revellers, absorbed the heavy bass thud of competing sound systems carried like insects on the breeze, and soaked up the last glow of fuzzy Australian evening light. We were at Mardi Gras, at the height of an adventure. Both of us were wearing straw cowboy hats donated by our hosts, something we'd feel idiotic wearing back in England, yet which felt fine here. I felt in a state of utter peace despite being surrounded by this neon chaos. My gig had gone well and I could relax. I'll never understand what happened in those few moments that irrevocably changed the dynamic of our relationship. When you think about what creates love, a spark, a jolt of electricity, a deep recognition, a feeling that I know this, I've been here, an instant connection. Maybe it makes sense that it can be ignited, rekindled, or extinguished so quickly. Love makes a mockery of time. It can be nurtured and sculpted over decades like a fine artist chipping away at a great work, or it can be so utterly fleeting and transient. It can leave you like a passenger on the platform, running vainly alongside the departing train and forced to give in and wait for the next one, the next chance. We had flown to the other side of the world and had, metaphorically speaking, turned our hearts upside down. Entering our third year, I was starting to feel a little trapped, a little weighed down by someone who kept spoiling my romantic fantasy by not stepping up to the plate, not wanting to be amazing, brave, and open together, by not having the vision or courage to move forward into our life. Come on, we can do this, I'd say. Yet, as she turned back towards me that night, bearing golden drinks, I felt the air escape from my atmosphere, as if I no longer needed oxygen, but just to breathe her. I felt my eyes become huge cinema screens, zooming into close-up, her face and smile flooding my retinas like a river bursting its banks. I felt deconstructed and reconstructed, my limbs and organs rearranged in unfamiliar patterns, yet finally all in the right place. We had not consumed any drugs or much alcohol. I can only attribute this earth-shattering, heartbreaking, bewildering, time-stopping feeling to pure, unadulterated love. Who needs drugs when you have this? I say heartbreaking because intrinsically I knew that this must be the first time I had seen my girlfriend truly, deeply happy. Away from the pressures of family and work, surrounded by long-lost friends in celebratory mode, here was the woman I'd been searching for. Here was her soul. And inevitably here also was mine. Yet this was a holiday. How could I save this, keep this, return here, mark it, bottle it? How many times had I said, I love you to her before this moment? How could I say it differently now? Add deeper resonance, reflect this new dimension, this extra universe of feeling that had snuck up and bolted itself onto my old version of love like a docking spaceship. Did she even feel it too? She must have, as she looked me square in the eyes right then and made a promise. I'll tell them, Rosie. I'll tell them about us. So, well, we know that relationship didn't work out because that was my ex. But things are fine now with my girlfriend. So don't worry. We are indeed engaged to be married now. Hurrah. And so that's kind of the happy ending to all this, that I have had quite a rocky road with relationships, with serial monogamy, with being on a real roller coaster. And I have had quite a lot of breakups in my life. But I indeed have learned a huge amount from those challenging times, from those times of being single and taking on new challenges and reaching out to friends and on one occasion going and having therapy and understanding why those relationships had not worked out, why maybe they weren't the right partner for me, or why I wasn't communicating well enough. And so there is a happy ending to all this. I think what I'd like to do now, I do have another extract I may read later on if people want to hear more. But I think what would be nice is if there are any questions or comments, or anyone wants to ask anything about this work or where it's come from, or about being a comedian or being a woman in comedy or being gay in comedy, or, well, anything really about life. Tell me your breakup story. Maybe I can help. maybe not. So I don't know if there are any questions, Joanna, that anyone has at this stage.
We haven't received any at the moment, but if people are frantically typing away now, then I will wait sort of 30 seconds.
I saw a couple of, I didn't actually get to read them. I think there were a couple of comments that that did come up.
Yep, there were a lot of clapping hands to see how much they liked your reading.
Oh, thank you. Oh, well, maybe I'll do one more little
Well, I actually
reading.
have my own question, if you don't mind.
Okay. Yes, lovely.
I am actually going through a bit of a period right now with having had a breakup in September of a rather serious relationship. And part of that is due to me discovering that I am bisexual and am approaching a period where I feel ready to start exploring relationships with women. Would you have any advice for me or anyone like me who is just discovering their own sexuality?
Yeah, well, I think female sexuality is so interesting, and actually in the Breakup Monologues, the new book that is coming out the end of the month, there's a section where I go along to a sex lab at the University of Essex to take part in these experiments where you're shown these an array of video clips of erotica, and it's either kind of women or men and so on. And these experiments have often been done historically on heterosexual participants, and you report what kind of arouses you or turns you on, and that is also measured because there's a device called a plasmograph, which I call a techno tampon, which essentially is something you insert, which is then wired up to a computer, which measures your arousal. And there is an equivalent device for measuring male arousal as well. And so what's quite interesting about these experiments is often men have a strong correlation between what they say they're turned on by and what physiologically they seem to be turned on by, whereas women, there's often a disconnect, because I think women are sometimes not aware of the kind of vastness of their sexuality. You often find women saying, oh yes, I'm just 100% sexual, I'm only turned on by thinking about men or looking at naked men, or and that kind of thing. And then what the experiments will say is that actually women are turned on by everything, and that our sort of capacity for arousal and desire is huge. Certainly for the majority of women. Obviously some women are asexual as well, and that's kind of a different story again, and that would focus more on romantic and emotional connections. But I think there's a strong case for the argument that we are all somewhat bisexual, or now perhaps we would say pansexual, and we all perhaps have the capacity to be attracted to anyone, regardless of their gender. And I think there's certainly a strong case for that being true, particularly for women, I think. And what I found sort of interesting about this experiment was that I found I was, and certainly the graphs of my arousal that I looked at with the researcher afterwards would certainly indicate that I was equally, or certainly almost as interested in looking at clips of men as I was of women. And I do think sometimes the way we define how we want to have relationships and connect romantically and emotionally doesn't necessarily completely correlate with who we want to sort of have a sexual connection with. And that doesn't always hook up neatly in the way in the package we might like it to, in order for us to have the relationship with the person we sexually desire. Sometimes we might be in love with one person and sexually desire somebody else, which is of course the kind of challenges that I explore and investigate in the first book, Is Monogamy Dead? And what was particularly hilarious about this experiment was that there's a control clip in between the different clips of men and women that's sort of to reduce your arousal state. And that was a David Attenborough nature documentary, which is fabulous. And I really like that. But I think the point of this is that, both myself and my partner were chatting after this experiment and realized that we are far more bisexual than our sort of recent relationship history would indicate, where we would certainly have our committed romantic relationships with women. But it doesn't mean that we don't sort of sometimes look at a good looking man and think, oh, you know, he's a really hot man. You know, I can still appreciate that as well. So I think sexuality is complicated, and I think the sort of narrowness of how we are, you know, in the sort of monogamous, in the Western world, and the way we look at relationships, it doesn't necessarily always allow us to explore our sexualities as much as we might want to or even need to. And so I think it can be limiting. And I think, yes, it's great to have that freedom to explore who you are and who you might want to connect with. And I mean, of course, in this first book, I talk to some people who are polyamorous and having more than one relationship. And actually, what's interesting in that world is there are a huge number of bisexual women who, you know, I mean, I don't think it necessarily, you know, I don't want to give too much credence to the idea that bisexual women want to have their cake and eat it and have a boyfriend and a girlfriend, but that, you know, because that's just stupid, because of course bisexual people are just as faithful and ethical and honest and upfront about, you know, monogamy and everything as anyone else. But there were lots of bi women who actually thrived on having completely honestly and ethically having a partner of each biological sex, so they could explore those two different parts of their sexuality. But I think it's absolutely something that we have to explore. We see a lot more kind of late blooming lesbians, where now we live such long lives, we don't always need or want the same things at different stages in our life, and we have to kind of be open to that. I think many women you know, have children with a male partner, and then might, once those children have sort of grown up and kind of fled the nest, they might think, actually, I want something different. And we are seeing a huge, the greatest rate of divorce increase is in the kind of over 50s and 60s kind of age range, largely initiated by sort of post-menopausal women who are like, well, I've had enough of my husband.
So
and either going off to explore a more independent journey where they, you know, start a new career, or becoming lesbians or queer women, bisexual women, or, you know, finding a different male partner that satisfies something different that they're looking for. Whereas I guess for a lot of women when they're younger, a big drive, a big sort of biological primal drive, is to find the father of their children. So I think for many women, when their children have grown up, we are seeing a sort of shift in priorities, and women sort of sometimes leaving their marriages, obviously in many cases as kindly and respectfully as they can, because.
But I think that that brings us quite neatly to another question that's come up.
Oh, great. Okay.
From Becca.
Yeah.
She asked, you talked about finally finding your one, the one. How did you know? And how do you know generally whether they're the one?
Well, you know, it's an interesting one, that, because I don't necessarily, I mean, my girlfriend is amazing. She's she's brilliant, and I know she's listening in the next room. But she is my best friend, and we have a laugh, and we are able to communicate. And I think that's the important thing. Like, it isn't always wall-to-wall kind of romance and passionate sex and flowers and love and amazingness. Like, sometimes, particularly, you know, during these second and third lockdowns that we've had in the UK, sometimes we've been a bit cheesed off with each other and like, oh God, you know, it's her again. Because you do, you know, it's hard. Like, when you've been together, I mean, we've been together, I think, like 4.5 years now. So you start to kind of sometimes annoy each other and irritate each other. But that's just from knowing somebody well and living with them and being in the same space with them. And, you know, or also through knowing somebody, you kind of love them on a deeper level as well. So I don't think it was I think I've kind of moved on from the sort of thinking that it's a lust at first sight or love at first sight. I mean, we did fancy each other quite quickly, but I don't think it was like this explosive, combustible thing. Like the second we saw each other, we just got chatting, and I could tell that she was nice and kind, and loved her family and had good kind of values that I responded to, and we were able to chat, and and we were flirting by text, and it was just really nice and felt easy. Whereas I think my previous relationships, particularly the one that I was talking about where we were in Australia together, and that was really fun, but she wasn't out to her family, that was always quite bogged down in conflict. But I think those relationships, it's hard to escape from them because you want to sort of solve the problem, and that can be incredibly compelling. And so we can sometimes stay in those relationships far longer than we really ought to. And I also talk in the new book a bit about sort of the cycling of on-off relationships, because I have a couple of friends who, fortunately now, they're much more on and solid than they used to be, but it used to be constant on, off, on, off. And apparently, if you have that constant cycle of getting together, breaking up, getting together again, you do, the relationship quality deteriorates in every cycle. So a bit like when you open up a JPEG file, the picture quality deteriorates every time, and if you resave it. So it's a bit like that. And I think I think it's important, once you've made a conscious decision and a conscious choice, this is the one that I'm going to commit to, rather than some kind of sign in some kind of more mystical kind of way. I think it's a conscious choice that, this is a good person who I actually get on with, and for all her good and less good qualities. To be honest, the less good qualities are really just when she's premenstrual. It's really only a few days a month.
Oh dear.
That's another chapter in the book. Hormonal hell, that one's called.
Oh, well, that's fascinating. I think I need to get this book. I need to read more about these different relationships. I think understanding those dynamics of relationships, like for example, ones that are on off, I think it would be fascinating to just hear more about the processes that go on to make that happen, how you're understanding each other and the effects, because I think it's something that it's so intense when you're in it that you may not realize it's as much of a shared experience, and to be able to look back and understand these things because they shape your life. I think that, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think that's all we have for questions. So we do have time for another reading.
Okay, cool. Well, my last reading then, and maybe we'll get another question in the meantime, but my last reading is, this is kind of one of my favorite kind of fun bits to read out at live events, and some people know this chapter. It's the Lesbian Sauna chapter, I call it, because in the first book, the sort of adventure I went on was to try and kind of think about sex again and reconnect with having a sexuality and feeling comfortable and confident with that, because I think my confidence had been knocked by the breakup that happened by email, and the fact that ultimately what kind of turned out to have happened was that my partner had a relatively brief overlap between two relationships, which I hadn't known about until many years later. So I think there's something about, if you are dumped because, it's because of course, a whole number of reasons to do with the relationship not working out. But if it feels that someone else appearing on the scene played part of a role in that breakup, it does feel quite personal. It does feel quite hurtful, and quite like that person was more appealing in some way than you. So there's a real sense of rejection in that. And so I think for quite a few years, trying to rediscover my sexiness and my attractiveness. And so one of the things I decided to do on this journey was to go along to, I'd heard about a lesbian sauna event. And let's hear about it. I'd been too much of a monogamous prude to realise, but lesbians are sometimes allowed to have casual sex, once every 2 months apparently. That's how frequently the Locker Room, a gay sauna just off South London's leafy and affluent Cleaver Square, is hijacked by the women. Now that I was writing a show on sex infidelity, I could visit under the comforting guise of research. I'd been told tales of wild excess about what went on there behind the clouds of steam and sweat by gay male friends. Would women behave with similar animalistic abandon? I heard about the sporadic women's event through my friend Belle, who described herself as solo poly and explained this as engaging in multiple ethically non-exclusive relationships while abandoning the hierarchical structure of a primary relationship. Although she cared very much for her lovers and friends, her key commitment was to herself and her own path. And to remind herself of this, she wore a single wedding ring around her neck on a chain. She had effectively married herself. To her, a lesbian sauna was no big deal. She had nobody to report her whereabouts to, and the partner she was with would totally get it anyway. Whereas to me, its very existence was a big neon sign informing me just what a clueless and closed-minded idiot I was. I didn't dare fantasize about actually doing anything sexual with a stranger in a public space. Belle and I agreed not to cramp one another's style. I would leave her to her own devices, or vices. Yet if I was in any way uncomfortable, I was to go and discreetly belch in her ear. It was the most ridiculous safe word ever. I wasn't even sure I could belch on demand. Yet she had once heard of a friend and his wife using it as a code, and the idea had tickled her enough to copy it. An amiable, bespectacled butch who seemed to be in charge proposed an icebreaker game in the cramped bar upstairs. Even though most of us were still clothed and sipping milky tea from polystyrene cups, there was a giggly frisson, the airless space rich with pheromones. The butch clapped her hands, like a PE mistress rounding up her girls, and explained we must speak to the person next to us. Then, when she rang a bell, switch our attention to somebody else. I inquired if the bell system would be employed later on, encouraging us to rotate partner once we'd started getting off with each other. This got a big laugh. I could have happily gone home then. But then, a slender-toned woman, a few years my senior, strutted over. "I'm Helen," she purred, fluttering eyelashes thick with mascara, browny grey curls cascading round long earrings, droplets of silver pointing down to her glistening neck and chest. "Rosie," I said instinctively, offering a handshake, a formal and robust greeting to legitimise what might follow. "What do you want to do tonight?" Oh, God. I hadn't prepared for this question. I thought to myself, I wouldn't mind an intelligent discussion on Britain's role in the European Union. Instead, I gulped. I looked over at Belle, wondered if I could employ our code this early into the evening. A fear gripped me I hadn't felt since I was a teenager, and Mum's friend had once asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up. How can you answer? How does anyone know? This was the same if I say spanking just for the hell of it. She might say, I'm into that, let's go. I might have to go through with it just out of politeness. Fortunately, the bell rang. A pretty Asian femme, barely half my age, whirled around to catch my eye, long painted fingernails giving her sexual tourism away. You look like a film star, she proclaimed. Thanks, I said. Which one? I don't know, she laughed. This was immediately more comfortable to me than the first situation with Helen. This girl clearly had no idea what she was doing, which meant I wouldn't be exposed as not knowing what I was doing either. Once we descended to the steamy, dimly lit basement, a blonde woman started nonchalantly flicking through a magazine, a strange mix of aloof and slutty. She pulled down her bikini top to rest under her breasts. Then, in a moment of OCD, started folding towels and tidying. This was hardly the hedonistic gangbang I'd anticipated. I imagined reporting back to my friend, the one person I told where I was in case I died. What happened, he'd say. Nothing, I'd say. But then, the Asian girl leaned forward from the bench above and whispered, let's do something. Silently, I took her hand and led her out to the shower. After being in the cosy cocoon of the sauna, emerging into the drafty corridor felt like stepping into a blizzard. How do gay men cope with this temperature change? We turned on the shower, tried to kiss under its dribbly warmth, but it was on a timer. The water kept stopping. Let's go to the steam room, she suggested. Well, the steam room was insanely hot, like climbing inside a kettle. There's no way I'd be able to stay in there long enough to make a woman orgasm. That shit takes time. We started kissing awkwardly like kids playing spin the bottle. Then, as the steam parted, I saw a familiar face. Who is that? I thought. Oh, God, yes. She's a regular at my gigs who often tweets me afterwards with not entirely welcome feedback. I imagined her judging me this time, holding up a scorecard. Hi, Rosie. Oh, hi, I blurted, sitting upright. And we all started chatting, as women do, then went upstairs for another cup of milky tea. Thank you.
Oh, that was brilliant. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Joanna.
We have another question. If
oh, yay. Okay, what's the question?
The question is from Claire. Is there any science behind why people cheat instead of simply leaving a relationship? I'm in a super happy relationship now, but in the past I did this many times.
Oh, Claire, naughty. Well, I think this, as I said, our sexuality is so complex, and the sort of language and dialogue around how we are supposed to have relationships doesn't necessarily take into account how the human brain works when we fall in lust and love. And the human brain is not really wired for us to be happy in long-term monogamous relationships. The human brain is wired to make us breed with lots of different partners, because that has an evolutionary benefit, whether you're male or female. So we are very conflicted. Our sort of societal constructs around long-term monogamy don't fit with our very primal biology. And I think that is the conflict that we find very difficult. It is quite normal to fancy other people if you're in a relationship with someone that you love. It doesn't mean you don't love your partner, but I think the main thing is to be able to communicate healthily, and not, if you have a secure attachment with your partner where you both feel loved and appreciated and valued, and if you have set your boundaries around what counts as cheating, and you trust that your partner wouldn't do something that is beyond the realms of what you would be able to discuss with one another, and it wouldn't sort of harm the relationship, then I think you can talk about these things quite openly. I think I've been in relationships before where if I said, oh my God, there was one of my ex-girlfriends who I think Tom Cruise is really hot. I don't necessarily always agree with everything he says or does, but or even some of the films he's been in, to be honest, but I think he's hot. And I think I've always thought that ever since Top Gun. I just think he's beautiful in Top Gun. We watched it again recently. I'm just like, Tom. And then that what's that weird, there's the kind of weird film where he goes to that weird sex party with all the masks and stuff. I'd shut, my girlfriend just shouted from the other room. And his hair, I want to touch his hair in that film. I don't know what it is, but I find Tom Cruise really, really attractive. And like I say, it's only certain men, it's mostly women for me, but Tom Cruise I really find attractive. But there's one of my exes, she was really cross, really, really angry and threatened and insecure about the fact that I fancied Tom Cruise, even though it's highly unlikely that I'm going to meet Tom Cruise and Tom Cruise is going to go, hey, Rosie Wilby, not famous London lesbian comedian, shall we, let's, have a fling. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. But I remember her being really, really cross about it. And I think if you're in a healthy relationship where you feel good about your love for one another, you should be able to say these things and have a laugh about these things. And I think it is quite normal to find other people, famous or not, or people around us in our consciousness, attractive. That is okay, and that is healthy. And there is an interesting test you can do where you can find out where your attachment style lies on a scale. I mentioned secure attachment, but you can also have an anxious or avoidant attachment style. And if you Google all of that, it's very, very interesting. And you know, even though these things do sort of get a bit defined in our childhood relationship with our parents and then our early sexual relationships, you can actually alter your kind of template that you have for attachment. And I think both me and my partner, we say that we have become much more secure in our current partnership. So I think even if you've had difficult relationships before, you can improve. You can learn. It's something you learn. It's a skill we don't sort of learn in school or university, but we learn in a much more human way. And there's lots of great books. I obviously try to make the science of attraction really, really accessible. But if you wanted to sort of get into some of the drier textbooks, they're all out there as well.
Oh, that is very interesting. I love the description of relationships as a skill, because they really are. And yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I think that is it for our questions, unless anyone has any last ones they'd like to pop in before we finish. I think that's everything. Have you got any last bits you'd like to read, or any last comments to finish on?
Well, just to say to people who have listened to this or might sort of listen to the podcast at a later date, if you found it useful, do listen to the Breakup Monologues podcast, or keep in touch with me on Twitter at Rosie Wilby, or on Instagram at Breakup Monologues. And well, I wish you all the best, Joanna, with your situation. I hope that you kind of find what is fulfilling and rewarding for you.
It's a time of exploration, I think. We'll
exciting.
Well, thank you so much for that very, very entertaining and insightful session. I think there's a lot to be learned from your book. So thank you for being a part of this festival.
No worries. Well, it's out at the end of the month and you can pre-order it now. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great. All right. Thank you, everyone.